going to skip over all of the stuff here that's in section 15, except for one thing. Go with me to page 142. Perry Shaw's approach to theological education is what he calls multidimensional and what I would call holistic. And one of the things that I wanted to just raise is on the middle of page 142, before we go to Churchland here as we conclude. There's a famous adage here from a guy named Festinger. Middle of this page, C2, in the middle of that page of 142, if you're there. And this is his summary. He was a social psychologist. People are more likely to behave their way into thinking than think their way into behaving. See that? I just want to point that out. If we had more time, we could debate that, whether you think that there's any truth to that. Along with lots of other things, I think there is some element of truth to that, but I don't want that to be taken to be the only truth, right? The reason I put it that way is that most traditional education, and even most of Churchland, tends to move in the direction of from understanding and right belief to getting to action, right? Maybe. So you start up there at the level of the head and you want to get to the hands sometime, and maybe it gets there. And people wind up with an awful lot of information in their heads. But if you're actually interested in the question of what transforms behavior, how does behavior change? How does conduct change? How do people live different kinds of lives? Maybe we need to think about this one. People are more likely to behave their way into thinking, new ways of thinking. You'll behave your way into new ways of thinking, not just think your ways into new ways of behaving, which is also a plea really for experiential learning, right? What I would say is this, just to be a little bit provocative. You can preach a lot of sermons on poverty and caring for the poor. Useful. I've done that myself. But there's nothing quite like serving the poor, knowing the poor, rubbing shoulders with the poor, and ministering to the poor to understand poverty and God's heart for the poor. I find more people have new thinking based on the new way of living that they have, the exposure that they have, behaving their way by going out and getting their hands dirty, so to speak, and then reflecting on it and saying, you know, I now see why the scriptures over and over and over and over again tell us that God loves the poor and has mercy upon the poor, and the church is called to exercise compassion towards the widow, the orphan, the outcast, and everybody else. I mean, I get it now, right? I just wonder whether there isn't something to this, actually, from Mr. Philosopher Guy, okay? Mr. Philosopher Guy, probably something to behaving our way into new ways of thinking and not just thinking our ways into new ways of behaving. And how do you learn to be a Christian? You just don't theologize about it, you actually start to do it. When I was converted to faith, I started doing stuff that I had never done before. I'd never been to a Bible study before. I'd never prayed before. I didn't know what this church thing really was, even though I'd gone to church for years and years and years. Right? I started doing new things, and I learned new ways of being and new ways of thinking that follow after new ways, actually, of behaving. I think there's something maybe to this.